listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. In yesterday morning's Deep Dive, we brought you an interview with a top real estate agent asking him, should we have a royal commission into the real estate industry? His response, no. He reckons the industry should be self-regulated. But he did signal support for better oversight as renters and first home buyers continue to struggle. Today, we're continuing our three-part series on Australia's housing crisis with one of the country's most vocal critics of the mess, Purple Pingers.
We do need things like rent caps and rent freezes because people are struggling now.
That chat coming up in the second half of today's episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Bension Siebert. It's Tuesday, March 12th.
Morning, Sasha. Kate Middleton has apologised for editing an official family photo that was released by Kensington Palace after it was sensationally pulled by several global news agencies. In a statement released on X, the Princess of Wales says she's been experimenting with editing and apologised for any confusion caused. The image, showing her surrounded by her 3 children, was the first official image released of Catherine since her abdominal surgery and had been meant to assure the public about her well-being, Sasha.
Yes, it had been meant to do that. However, eagle-eyed watchers noticed several Photoshop fails in this photo, including blurry sections, missing parts, and even that the foliage in the background looked out of season for England, just coming out of winter. Hours after it was released, AP, AFP, Reuters, the Press Association and Getty Images all issued a kill notice saying the image had been manipulated. And despite mounting pressure, Kensington Palace says it will not be issuing the original unedited photo. Now, Bension, we did a video. I sat down with our social media editor yesterday and I got him to point out all of the issues with the image. And he said, look, really, it's a bunch of photos stitched together. So Kensington Palace's position that, we're not going to release the original unedited image, in his opinion, is because it doesn't exist. That photo was a mishmash of lots of different photos. We also did talk about this in yesterday afternoon's Deep Dive. We also looked into the whole conspiracy surrounding Kate and why people are so obsessed with conspiracies in general and engaging with them and talking about them on social media. So that was a really interesting chat worth checking out if you haven't yet.
I must admit that the idea that the princess herself went in and she was just photoshopping a little bit along the edges is a little difficult for me to believe. Although maybe I'm getting into conspiracy theories now. What the hell?
See?
The UN Secretary-General is renewing calls for a ceasefire in Gaza as Ramadan begins with no deal in sight.
My strongest appeal today is to honour the spirit of Ramadan by silencing the guns.
Antonio Guterres has also called for the removal of all obstacles to ensure aid deliveries. The war has been ongoing for 5 months now. In other news from Gaza, Hamas's second highest military leader may have been killed in an airstrike. If his death is confirmed, Marwan Issa would be the highest ranking official from Hamas killed in the conflict. Neither Israeli or Hamas officials have commented on the suspected death.
Also today, Australia will not be reinstating funding to the UN's main provider of humanitarian aid to Palestinians until an investigation into the agency is complete. Australia paused funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, along with a dozen other countries, in January. It followed allegations some of the agency's staff members had been involved in the October 7 attacks on Israel. Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong has made clear the government wants to resume funding to the UNRWA as no other organisation can fulfil its responsibilities. We have heard from Sweden and Canada on the issues. They have announced they will be resuming funding.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he intends to enable the safe departure of the 1.4 million Palestinians sheltering in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah before launching a ground invasion there. Australia's PM, Anthony Albanese, US President Joe Biden and other world leaders have urged Israel not to invade Rafah over fears it will cause a further catastrophe for civilians struggling to survive there. Israel has warned it will launch a ground invasion of Rafah by March 10 if Hamas doesn't release all the hostages, and obviously that deadline has passed. So it's a particularly frightening time for the people sheltering in Rafah. The NRL judiciary has given a monster 8-week ban to Roosters prop Spencer Leniu over a racial slur directed at Indigenous player Ezra Mam. He pleaded guilty to contrary conduct at the hearing last night, where the panel unanimously agreed on the 8-game suspension. Mam made the complaint against Leniu during the Roosters and Broncos season-opening clash in Las Vegas last week. The judiciary last night acknowledged Leniu's remorse and attempt to apologise in person to Mam, but rejected arguments that he was completely unaware of the racist meaning behind the slur and it should be considered a serious offence.
Mam wasn't there at the judiciary. He did write a statement, though, that was read out. He said he was so angry when he heard Leniu call him the slur that his mind was no longer focused on the game. I think this is a really strong and decisive penalty issued by the NRL judiciary and sends a really clear message that racism is not going to be tolerated. And Oppenheimer has swept the Oscars, claiming Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. Cillian Murphy became the first Irish-born person to take home the Best Actor gong as well.
We made a film about the man who created the atomic bomb, and for better or for worse, we're all living in Oppenheimer's world, so I would really like to dedicate this to the peacemakers everywhere.
While Ukraine's president has praised his country's first ever Oscar win, 20 Days in Mariupol taking out Best Documentary, Volodymyr Zelensky saying the film shows the truth about Russian terrorism. Also happening at the Oscars yesterday, everyone was talking about Ryan Gosling's rendition of I'm Just Ken. It's been stuck in my head all morning, so thanks so much, Ryan Gosling. Also, one that I liked, Margot Robbie wore black. Now, she's been showing up to the awards season in a lot of pink in celebration of Barbie. Some were saying that her wearing black was a dig at the Academy for not recognising Barbie more in the nominations. So take from that what you will.
And before we get into today's deep dive, we wanted to shout out some of your comments that have come through during our first episode into whether we need a royal commission into Australia's real estate industry. Renelle got in touch with us via DM saying, quote, "First National dude made me laugh, saying it's not illegal. Maybe so, sir, but it's not ethical, is it?" Christy Jane commented on our video of the interview with Rob Westwood saying, quote, "Didn't love finding out that if real estate don't like the way I post on socials that they might not give me a lease. Most young people are more likely to post about fun social things, not keeping a clean house."
I think I saw a lot of comments as well on our TikTok saying, I keep all my accounts private for this very reason. So maybe not a surprise to as many people as we thought it might have been. It was a surprise to me. Look, we also heard from @Maddie_J_S. He said we're blaming the wrong people, saying state and federal governments should be held to blame. I agree wholeheartedly. However, I also think it's important to shine a light on the entire issue. We're hearing a lot about state and federal initiatives, good and bad, but no one's really talking about the body that is responsible for renting and selling these properties. So we wanted to look into that a little bit deeper. And thank you so much to everyone who did get in touch and share their thoughts. We want to hear more, and we want to hear them in the form of voice messages. So if you do feel like sharing, get in touch via our DMs on Instagram, and we will publish them in an upcoming episode as well. All right, let's get into part 2 of our real estate series. Today we're talking all things renting with Purple Pingers. Australia's rental market is in crisis. In numbers released last week, the national vacancy rate was revealed to have hit a record low of 0.7%. A recent survey has found 82% of respondents were suffering rental stress. That's when you spend more than 30% of your income on housing. While data released last year shows in our most expensive capital cities, renters need to be earning 6 figures to avoid that. The figures are bleak, and so too is the anecdotal evidence. Horror stories from tenants about urgent repairs being refused, rents being jacked up by hundreds of dollars, and no grounds evictions are common. Someone who is very familiar with this situation is a man you might know as Purple Pingers. What started off as a TikTok account reviewing shit rentals has turned into a career for Jordie Van Den Berg, who last year launched a first-of-its-kind website, shitrentals.org, for tenants to name and shame dodgy properties, agents and agencies. His bio on YouTube is literally, "I hate real estate agents." So does Jordie think it's time for a royal commission into the industry? He joins me now. Jordie, welcome to the briefing. So what do you reckon? Should we have a royal commission into the real estate industry?
I think so. Why not?
Why?
We've had so many commission inquiries and lines of inquiries, both at the federal and state level, and we've had a bunch of recommendations come through from all of those state and federal inquiries, and none of the recommendations have been actioned. So a royal commission is going to do the exact same thing, but there's a bit more weight to it, and it looks worse for government if they don't do anything about it. So I feel like it's going to be a benefit to renters, and it's going to it'll put real estate agents on notice, and royal commissions have a bit more power than the state and federal Senate inquiries. So, they can compel witnesses to appear and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. Whether or not it will happen is yet to be seen.
Yeah, well, it's not something that is really actively being discussed in the halls of Canberra right now, at least to our knowledge. Do you think then, the response from federal and state and territory governments has been pretty strongly worded over the last couple of years? The crisis has only increased in terms of its severity. Do you think then that so let's say focus on supply and building more houses and attacking it from that perspective, do you think that's kind of taking the quote-unquote easy way out rather than addressing the issue, which can come down to things like the real estate industry itself?
Yeah, 100%. Every state and territory and federal government has acknowledged we have an issue. Every one of them has acknowledged it's getting worse. And every one of their solutions is to, kick the can further down the road and maybe build some homes in 10, 20 years. So, they've acknowledged we've got a problem. They've acknowledged we've got a problem now. Their solution is to build a couple homes in 20 years. What's that? That's ridiculous. Their solutions are to build homes that don't meet their own projected demand.
All right, well, let's talk about Shit Rentals, which is the website you got started, which is, this active database of real estate reviews, whether it be for agencies or for properties themselves. What's the response been like to that, and what do you think that response says about the state of the market?
So the response from renters and surprisingly prospective home buyers has been overwhelmingly positive. The response from landlords and real estate agents has been overwhelmingly negative, which kind of points to me doing the right thing, because that's exactly the response I wanted. I'm not on real estate agents' side, so and it's just pointing out, things that I didn't ever consider, things like the type of racism that occurs in real estate agency kind of conduct, and just these weird, a lot of really bad issues that, I'm from a privileged background, I would have never considered.
Yeah, well, let's talk about real estate agents. I spoke to an executive as part of this kind of look at whether we need a royal commission into the real estate industry. And I asked him the question, do we need one? He said, nah, I don't think so. There are problems. Yeah, exactly. There are problems, but I think that we can solve them ourselves. Now, his suggestion was some sort of oversight from within the industry itself. So he referred to the issue as, policing. So, we should be policed, but not by an outsider, by someone who is within the industry. What do you make of that suggestion?
I mean, it's the stupidest thing to say, because we already have that. Every single real estate institute of Australia in the states and territories has their own code of conduct that isn't policed. They already say, real estate agents, when shitrentals.org came out, they were like, oh, this isn't an issue. It's going to go away. And then eventually kept happening, and they're like, okay, well, maybe we'll acknowledge it now. When people ask the real estate institutes about reference checks, the real estate institutes are saying, hey, we only ask the required questions. We don't ask anything that goes beyond what is required to process a tenancy application. And we know that is just objectively not true. They are self-regulating. This is the self-regulation system working as intended, i.e. not working. So it's a stupid. It's like it's a comment provided to you by a real estate agent, which sounds exactly like something a real estate agent would say.
What do you think of an independent police system for the real estate industry? Do you think, so outside of a royal commission, let's look at what potentially could be like a kind of groundbreaking or at least revolutionary approach to the industry. Do you think having an independent overseer of the industry might be the answer?
We've already got them. We've already got consumer affairs and fair trading bodies in all states and territories which do this and, like, to be quite frank, do quite a poor job of it. There's no trust between renters and the regulator because they can see the regulator not doing anything. So they're not reporting to the regulator and they're reporting to idiots like me instead. So let's look internationally. We've got the same thing as well. You've got the tribunals or whether or not it's an actual court or a tribunal system. Like, we've got the police already. They're not doing their job, and that's just a fact.
Actually, let's talk about that a little bit in terms of the tribunal system, because I'm a renter and I've found myself in positions before where I have considered it, but the way that it's set up, in that it's a court essentially where you have to show up and you have to have paperwork and you have to pay, you have to take time off work, it's intimidating. And I'm an educated and competent person. I can imagine for an 18-year-old who's just out of home, who's finding themselves in a really difficult position, that would be scary as hell to have to try and front up to one of those. I mean, I guess that's your point, isn't it? Is that the system as it isn't super duper accessible in terms of welcoming people in to be like, hey, tell us your issues, we're going to fix them.
Yeah, and it's working as it's intended. I heard a story yesterday of two PhD havers. They owned their house, they were renovating, they moved out. They rented for a 12-month period while they moved out, and the landlord was just objectively doing illegal things, like things that weren't in accordance with the rental agreement. They knew their rights. They knew exactly the steps to take, and they were like, it's not worth the effort. And these are, two wealthy people with PhDs. These are the people that the system assumes are going to do something if required, and they're not doing something. So what is the vulnerable person at the end of the day doing in that situation? It's working as intended. They know that it's not going to happen. If renters are required to kind of enforce their own rights through the tribunals, it's the equivalent of a cop rocking up if a family member was murdered and giving you a copy of the Crimes Act and then saying go for your life and then leaving you, like, just walking away.
Yeah. Look, do you think the system as it is, which essentially sees people investing in what is a human right, which is housing, should be dismantled? Is it time to take it apart as it is and find a better way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we've got a massive kind of societal expectation that, hey, me owning someone else's land, quite literally Indigenous people's land, is my right. And I think it's wrong. I think we need to acknowledge that housing is a human right. It's not something that we should be considering, like market demand and supply and stuff like that. We need a complete shift in culture when it comes to housing. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to happen. But whether or not that's ever going to be done is yet to be seen.
All right, well, let's look at then the realistic approach. What would you like to see in terms of what you think could be achieved over the next decade in the real estate industry?
Yeah, well, I think in answering that question, I do want to say that, renters need a long-term solution that helps, so like a decade-long solution, but they also need short to immediate-term relief, and no one's talking about the short to immediate-term relief. But if we're talking like a decade-long kind of process, it would be pretty simple stuff like getting rid of negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount exemption thing, and then kind of regulating the short stay accommodation market. I think, that in the immediate term, we should probably consider banning it because the vacancy rate is too low, and over 70% of short stay accommodation were previously long-term rentals. So, like, bring those back to the market. I think we need a national residential vacant land tax. If there's, a home that is vacant for over 6 months, that should either be extraordinarily taxed or used. It should be used productively. I think we need to see quite a few things. Like, those are some small kind of changes that could make a shift in consciousness occur. But until those are done, we do need things like rent caps and rent freezes because people are struggling now. And those things aren't going to be achieved particularly by this government, nor probably the next government.
Well, again, like you said at the top, maybe that's what a Royal Commission could achieve, is actually lighting the fire under the federal government to make those changes. Jordie, thank you for your insights. You are uniquely positioned to talk on this topic, and we do appreciate them, and for you joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that is all for this morning's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to join us tomorrow morning for the final part of this series with Greens MP Max Chandler-Mather. And we'd love to hear your stories about how you're feeling about the rental crisis in Australia. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can send us a message on Instagram, search The Briefing Podcast. Be sure once you're there to give us a follow as well and join our brand new broadcast channel Behind the Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Thanks for listening.
Listener.